guys, it's Gary. I'm back again. Another short one. I know I haven't delivered on my promise of certain videos. I will be doing Paul Desmond. It's just easier to do these shorter videos. About this obscure album series that seems to have really gotten started with Ron, My Lung Puppy, and Carm, and Jeff Vinylspin. Got me thinking, there's quite a few things I think that I have that are obscure, and I think I'm going to take a chance here. Instead of doing something that's obscure by a musician that no one's ever heard of, it's maybe a bit more challenging to do something obscure by a musician that's kind of well known, depending on how deep into jazz you are. But when I came across that Jerome Cooper album that I did my video on, the next one that came up that had me check it out, that also made me say the same thing when I saw Jerome Cooper. I said, wow, this is pretty obscure. I don't think too many people have this. And I may be wrong here. As Carmen and I said, we thought we had the most obscure tastes in the world musically. And when we joined the VC, we're basically kind of the teeny boppers in a way, listening to some very commercial stuff comparatively to what some of the folks listen to. But I came across this album, and again, I haven't listened to this, I don't know, 25 years or more. And this time, not only have I listened to it at least a half a dozen times before doing the video, I've already actually copied it into my computer, burnt a CDR of it, which is what I'm playing now. I'm taking my chance here, because I have had copyright problems. We'll see how it goes. How much of this music gets picked up and recognized is questionable. But the obscure album that I chose, something by a bass player that's fairly well known. Born in 1930, and I thought, wow, I haven't heard of him doing anything recently, and my past history has not been that good with getting into an artist, some old records that I have, only to find out they passed away recently. I'm happy to report that Richard Davis, the bass player, even though he was born in 1930 and he probably isn't terribly active right now, is still very much alive. And I had this album that I came across, and it's one of my great $3.99 specials that I bought new and sealed back in the day. I bought this very early 80s. An album called With Understanding. The date on here was 1975, but there was no recording information listed. And eventually, thanks to the good old internet, I was able to peg a date onto the recording. I actually recorded November 1971. The album was actually released under a different title originally. So I'm making it even easier for you folks to possibly have a copy of this under two different names with the same album. It was recorded November 1971. And I'm doing this from memory because I did look it up and find it, but I didn't write it down. But I'm fairly sure it was November 71, and released shortly after, initially as an album called The Philosophy of the Spiritual. And I'm going to turn the music down because I don't know, it might be too loud. And I hadn't listened to it since I first bought it a bunch of times. I'm sure I listened to it then. Vinyl's in pretty decent condition. The edition that I have, which was originally, like I said, released as The Philosophy of the Spiritual in 71, on a different record label called Cobblestone Records. And it was re-released in 75. Now, in 75, they didn't, I don't know, for whatever reason, didn't put the recording date on there. But Muse Records, which was a New York-based record company. That's another one. I'm not sure if Muse Records is around anymore. Re-released it and retitled it as With Understanding, but otherwise unchanged. Apparently didn't remix it, didn't exchange tracks off it or anything. Interesting album. There's 2 tracks on here. Dear Old Stockholm, which is a traditional track written by a belongs to an unknown Swede, so it was a Swedish author that wrote it. Though Stan Getz made the tune very popular, and Miles Davis in the early 50s also recorded a version of it. And there is a second song called "Oh My God," which is actually a really good track by Nadia Koma, Koma, and it's actually from a ballet written by Nadia Koma. That's a really good track. 6 tracks total on the album. Interestingly, the other 4 tracks were not written by Richard Davis, but were written by a second bass player on the album. So it's very interesting. It has 2 bass players. Richard Davis is an upright bass player, and he called this guy Bill Lee, another upright bass player, who actually wrote 4 of the 7 tracks on the album. So it's almost as much of a Bill Lee album as it is a Richard Davis album. And there's 2 upright bassists on there. And the sound doesn't really clash like you would expect it would, because at least one of the basses is always playing arc oboeing style and often playing the melody. So it's quite an interesting album. There's a couple musicians that I've heard of that I'm not overly familiar with. There's a guy named Sonny Brown, who is the drummer. It's a 6-piece band. Frankie Dunlop, who is a percussionist. As I already mentioned, you have Bill Lee and Richard Davis both playing upright bass. Sam Brown on guitar. Now, I'm pretty sure, and I forgot to look this up, I'm pretty sure Sam Brown passed away years ago. Sam Brown, primarily known as being an electric jazz guitarist. If you know who Mick Goodrick is, I always want to say that they're stylistically fairly close. He was an electric player. Sam Brown played a kind of modern, definitely rooted in jazz, but definitely a bit more modern than, say, someone like a Jim Hall. So I wouldn't say he was a rock fusion guitarist, but he had one ear a bit more modern, even though he was steeped in jazz. And known primarily as an electric guitarist. And I want to say Sam Brown actually recorded mostly as a sideman that I know of. And apparently Keith Jarrett thought enough of him to use him on one of his albums. And Keith Jarrett's take on electric instruments. He doesn't like them. And yet the album that Sam Brown played on with Keith Jarrett, and I want to say possibly Gary Burton as well, he actually did play electric guitar. So apparently Keith Jarrett thought enough of Sam Brown's talents that it didn't bother him that this was an electric guitarist playing on this album. And I'm talking pre-ECM. I do have the album, and I forgot to pull it out, and I'm not even sure which album it is, but it's a non-ECM Keith Jarrett album that Sam Brown does play electric guitar on. Could have been one of his Impulse ones, probably was, but kind of thought it was interesting because Keith Jarrett's anti-electric stance. And I was totally unaware of, and I've got Sam Brown here and there on a few different things, always playing electric. Interesting thing with this album is it's the only time I've ever heard it. Sam Brown is playing what sounds like a nylon string throughout the whole album. Doesn't sound like a steel string acoustic. The whole album sounds like it's played on nylon string, which makes it interesting because that means that the entire 6-piece band is an all-acoustic band. Drums, percussion, 2 upright bass players, Sam Brown playing a nylon string guitar, and an acoustic pianist who's probably the best known, certainly the best known person in the group, and that's none other than Chick Corea playing acoustic piano on this. And I don't know if you're going to be able to read this. Hopefully yes. Let me see. I'm going to try to adjust my focus here a bit. It's not focusing. Okay, well, trust me, it's Chick Corea on piano. So it's quite interesting. Chick's, been a leader for many years, and by 71 certainly was a leader. I played this, again, on vinyl, and my turntables give me all kinds of problems. I have one of the channels, I don't know if it's my stereo receiver, one of the channels keeps cutting out on me. So to attempt to copy vinyl over is a really difficult process. I'll start a tune. Halfway through the tune, the left channel's gone. I have to pull out my receiver, jiggle the wires, and sometimes the channel comes back. So what did I do? I figured it was the wires. I replaced the wires. Same thing still happens. So I think there's a I'm not sure. Is it coming from the turntable, or I think it may be the input for the turntable and the receiver may be bad on one of the channels, or one's canceling the other out or something. So it takes a lot of work to get a hunk of vinyl recorded, properly into my computer and burnt onto a disc. It took a whole bunch of tries. But I've been listening to this album quite a lot. Full 38-minute masterpiece. I wish it was recorded better. A bit dry in the recording quality. Some of these albums, a lot of these albums, I wish had been recorded by the ECM engineers who really knew how to record acoustic instruments. But this is a New York-based album. Quite interesting. It gets a little bit bopish at times, a little bit toward the mainstream, but there's a lot of arco, a lot of bowed bass on there. This kind of takes it to a different place. The nylon string guitar adds an interesting texture. The percussion, the hand percussion, adds an interesting texture. Quite an interesting album, actually. And it's funny because when I played it, I remembered nothing of it. So I don't think I played it much when I first bought it. So Richard Davis with Understanding. And I was iffy as to whether I was going to show this or not. Because this is one of those things where somebody could pull out, oh yeah, I've had a copy of that for years. I'm not sure. And he is a very well-known bassist. In the late 50s, he was part of Sarah Vaughan's rhythm section. He played with Jack Ibard, Eric Dolphy, Booker Ervin, Andrew Hill, Elvin Jones, Laura Nyro. Now, according to this, he actually recorded on Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. I'm guessing there's some upright bass on there or something. Van Morrison's Astral Weeks as well, which is one of Van Morrison's highest regarded albums. He's known even in the classical world. I believe he's played with some orchestras. I know he's played in the classical context as well. And more as a sideman, he's known for. He has, a handful of solo albums out, but not a whole hell of a lot when you realize that this guy's been going since the 1950s. A couple things that I do have by him now, which you may have heard of, where he's a part of the Creative Construction Company. There's 2 volumes of this. I only have the second volume, which I bought. Kind of a free jazz thing. Definitely, if you don't like free jazz, stay away. I just found out, though, that these 2 volumes were released on CD in Japan only. It'd be nice to hear them cleaned up and on CD. The Creative Construction Company was a band that was around, I didn't even read these notes, I think early 70s. But the lineup is incredible. Leroy Jenkins, Anthony Braxton, Leo Smith, who's now known as Reduta Leo Smith, Mulehall Richard Abrams, Steve McCall on percussion, and Richard Davis on bass. So it's pretty much all superstar leaders of the free jazz movement. So Richard Davis was a part of this. One of his best-known non-pop albums, because I didn't know he did Born to Run, he's on Eric Dolphy's Out to Lunch, an album that I initially bought. I was interested in exploring Eric Dolphy, but I got to admit I bought it because I love the cover so much, one of those classic Blue Note covers. He was the bassist on this, and offhand, I don't know the date of it. He's also on one of my favorite, I showed this. This is one of those albums that have never come out on CD that I'm dying for it to come out on CD. I love this. A mainstream guitar, electric guitar, upright bass, drums trio by Jimmy Rainey, the late great jazz guitarist. It's the first album I ever had by Jimmy Rainey. I love this to this day. Another album I bought initially, I wanted to get something by Jimmy Rainey, but I bought it because I love the cover so much. This is from 75? I think it's about from 75. 74 or 75 this was recorded. I know it was recorded in one day. July 21st, 1974. And then released in 75. I love this album. Richie Davis was the bass player on here. So that's my Obscurities number 2. I have possibly one more vinyl, but I have more CDs, but it might be cheating in a way, some of the CDs, because they're by artists that almost no one's ever heard of. So I don't know, that might be cheating. It's a bit harder to come up with a Richard Davis album that possibly people may not have heard of, simply because he's so well known as a sideman. So that's my number 2 in the Obscurities thing. I thought I would throw that in there. It's a holiday weekend, so maybe folks have an extra day off and a little bit more time to watch videos. I wanted to get something out there for those folks that may have the extra time to watch videos, and I'm going to keep going. I may do another Obscurities. I may get back to do my long-winded, boring Paul Desmond thing. But guys, that's Obscurities number 2 for me, and I'll be back soon. I hope there's some value to it for you, and hope everyone's having a great weekend. Take care.